Greetings, duelists, and welcome to another video. Phantom Nightmare format has just begun. We are at our first weekend after a set release, and we've been seeing a bit of interesting results in terms of our current metagame. I think the elephant in the room is that the Snake Eye Fire King deck is like the best deck as of right now. Before this format started, we had a format where we didn't have a definitive best deck. We only had like a bit definitive of what engines were more popular than others and what the trends people were leaning towards before this current format. Uh, so what I'm going to do here today is talk about stuff that you need to look out for, stuff that you should be knowledgeable when it comes to this current format, because if you're not careful, you're going to be losing a lot of games against a lot of different strategies. Uh, it not necessarily has to be the Snake Eye Fire King deck. It could also be another deck, like for example the Voiceless Voice deck, that is also debuted from Phantom Nightmare, as well as other strategies. So, without further ado, let's begin. Uh, we already talked about Snake Eye Fire Kings, like as a concept. We already brought up how powerful the deck is, but one thing to note is that similar to Voiceless, in some regard, the Fire King deck is a heavy graveyard reliant strategy. And that is really, really important because one of the game plans that you need to think of when it comes to this current format is tackling the graveyard. Uh, as you can see here in my hand, we see 6 different hand traps. Some hand traps are more popular than others, and some hand traps are like stuff that people look at it as a necessary evil. But I'm going to talk about which hand traps you should be like focusing more, because uh, I think we're in a moment where people are way too convinced a certain hand trap needs to be played, but the more you play that hand trap, the more people are focused on it, and the more you just start losing games because you pretty much like had yourself fixated on using your hand trap as your main issue of solving like the current format, instead of you playing properly with your interruptions or with your resources into the format. And the first card I want to talk about is Droll and Lockbird. uh, I think Droll and Lockbird is a card that everybody's looking into. Everybody thinks that this is like the best hand trap at the moment, at the current format that we're at. And if you look at it from like half glass full perspective, you might be correct. Like against the Fire King deck, if they start with something like, for example, Bonfire, or they start like with the Snake Eye Ash as part of their like initiation, or they start with something like Fire King Island or something like that, then the Draw Lockbird might like halt their turn a little bit, and it makes their board a little bit more weaker than what you're expecting. However, we now have a new problem. The Snake Eye engine can play around Droll and Lockbird. Basically, the way you're going to be playing around Droll and Lockbird is after you add the Poplar can link itself into a new monster. The Poplar will put itself in the spell and trap zone, and then you're just going to siphon your Ash into Oak and then into Flamberge Dragon. And all of those are summons from the deck, meaning that like Droll and Lockbird pretty much was very null and void because they got to half their win condition without needing to search any cards. You can make the argument that you have Ash Blossom, and if you pair your Ash Blossom alongside Droll and Lockbird, then it could be very detrimental for your opponent because Ash Blossom actually does stop Snake Eye Ash. Uh, However, you have a new problem, and that is that your Ash Blossom is in your graveyard, meaning that Hita, the Flame Charmer, can reborn your Ash Blossom, and that will put them into Promethean Fire Princess, and that will make it so they insulate their plays even further. Like any one extender alongside the Snake Eye engine can just play through Ash and Drool. So on that regard, you have to be careful whenever you're playing these two hand traps. You need to make sure that you know what you're stopping from your opponent. Either that, or make sure that whatever strategy you're playing can capitalize on what your opponent is trying to do if you can use these hand traps. So now that I talked about Ash and Drool for a little bit, I want to talk about the other hand traps. I think Valor and Imperm are little bit more important than normal, because against the Snake Eye Fire King deck, if you can infinite impermanence and Snake Eye Ash, that's a lot of value that you're getting out of this card, because not only you're stopping the search effect, but you're also stopping the effect to summon a monster from the deck. For those who don't know the ruling, if you activate Snake Eye Ash to send it two cards to summon from the deck, the game recognizes that that is effect that is starting on the field, and it will be negated because it was already negated by the Valor or the Impermanence. So now that we are looking at Imperm and Valor from that perspective, another hand trap that I feel like is really, really important we should talk about is DD Crow. Uh, it's not only good against the Snake Eye deck because you can banish Garunix. Most people are only playing one copy of Garunix. Most people are playing one copy of Flamberge Dragon. So just getting those two cards out of the graveyard is extremely important. You're getting rid of their power plays. You're getting rid of their grind game. You're getting rid of a lot of resources that they're gaining if those cards are uncontested. So DD Crow is very strong in that regard. Against the voiceless voice deck, Crow is also important because it banishes the Saphira, which means they have to work even harder for the Skull Guardian summon. It can banish the low from the graveyard, meaning that the Skull Guardian does not have the protection as well as the barrier. It doesn't have the protection. So they pretty much have to rely on adding another copy of low and having low into rotation even harder if you just end up DD crowing. And you're probably going to be facing other strategies, not necessarily named Voiceless Voice or like the Sacred Snake Eyes Fire King deck that just loses to graveyard interactions. Uh, Another key point that I'm going to bring up is Dimension Shifter. I think any single deck that plays Dimension Shifter has a huge advantage this format, and I know a lot of people are going to be thinking that Shifter just has an advantage in every format, but that's not necessarily correct. We've had formats where Shifter is not as dominant because the more stronger decks in the format don't automatically lose to Shifter. For example, our last format last year had Kashtira dominating for pretty much over half the year, and then the latter half of the year we had Rescue Ace and Unchained as two other dominant strategies, and all those decks did not automatically lose to Shifter, although Shifter did weaken a little bit of those strategies. So any deck that can play Shifter, I think has a huge advantage. Floowandereeze and Exo Sister are two main decks that come into mind. There's also Goatee that also received new support from Phantom Nightmare and is actually very decent support. So I think the Goatee deck has a really good advantage this format, not only just because of Dimension Shifter, but the fact that it is a strategy that can play around cards that would be natural offenders for what is given in the format. I'm going to make a separate video talking about this, but Jubel, the new support from Phantom Nightmare, is also really, really strong. And another really cool thing about Jubel is that this strategy can also play Dimension Shifter. So I think this is one strategy too that you should be looking into. If you want to play a strategy that plays with Dimension Shifter, I think this is a really strong choice Almost everything that makes this deck viable, this strategy viable, already comes out in the Phantom Nightmare set. And is we're already confirmed support, well, not support, reprints of the original Jubel cards in Battles of Legend. So this deck is very budget, similar to all these other decks. One other deck that I haven't pointed out in this list is Kashtira. I think Kashtira is another really strong pick this format. Any deck that can play Fenrir and Unicorn has a good advantage there. So now that I talked about like the shifter deck and like the hand traps, I guess one other hand trap that I haven't mentioned yet is Ghost Bell. I think Ghost Bell is the one of the better hand traps this format. I think Ghost Bell is better than Ash Blossom and Droll Leopard. For starters, this negates a lot of the interactions with the Fire King deck. Like it negates Garunix, it negates the Kirin, at least the graveyard effect from Kirin. It negates the Flamberge Dragon. It negates the Promethean Fire Princess. Both effects, to be precise. Uh, it's also good against Voiceless Voice. It stops Low from recurring itself. It stops like a few of their key cards because they do interact with the graveyard. So I think Ghost Belt should be a hand trap you are looking into if you are going to be playing a hand trap reliant strategy. Now that we covered the hand traps, I guess I should talk about silver bullet cards. Um, I guess I'm going to start with Thrust. You can also add talents to the list. I think Thrust and talents are very, very strong this format. I think those cards have a very significant advantage as board breakers. But besides those, I want to talk about three other cards. I'm going to flip them all at the same time. We have Gravekeeper's Inscription, we have Soul Release, and we have Silent Graveyard. Uh, these three cards are almost very similar, but at the same time, they're a bit different. The main reason you should be looking into these three cards is because they all interact with the graveyard in massive numbers. Like if you're facing the Snake Eye Fire King deck and you open either Inscription or Soul Release or Silent Graveyard, these are cards that pretty much shuts down their strategy during your turn and makes it so it's significantly way less oppressive, like when you're countering with your strategy or you're going second. Also going first, these cards are also really strong. Well, specifically Silent Graveyard and Inscription are very strong. Not Soul Release. Soul Release is solely a going second card. But going first, like you can just activate Inscription, call like the graveyard effect, and just knowing that your opponent does not have any interactions in the graveyard, whether you go first or second, is just very, very strong. Similarly, you can just set Silent Graveyard, and if you see your opponent like is trying to do their Fire King plays, like you just flip Silent Graveyard, and like just insulate their turn. Now that we talked about like the silver bullet cards, at least the graveyard ones, there are a few other cards that I want to talk about, and it's pretty much just an engine. Uh, so we're going to talk about branded, and we're going to talk about Shadow. We're going to talk about both of them together. I feel like branded is a very, very, very strong strategy this format. If we go back to like my explanation on hand traps, uh, Ash Blossom is a lot weaker into the best deck of the format, which will prompt a lot of players to like ultimately have a deck building decision that is probably going to nullify using Ash Blossom as a priority. And that's very important because it means that the decks that are naturally weak to Ash Blossom, like Branded, just are significantly like more impactful because they have a lot less to worry about. Adding to this, uh, Branded just plays very well into the Fire King board. Like their graveyard interactions and their field interactions mainly involve destruction, which is something that they are akin to. You can just pair up other strong cards, like for example Branded Loss, or like for example just summoning Mirror Jade, like summoning Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, the gimmick Puckpet Lock, just to name like a couple of examples, and those are all cards that just insulate with your opponent's board. Another really strong thing to note is that Fallen or Fallbass just contest against like the main board that they usually make. Like if you're playing against, if they have like Amblo Whale, you can just fuse with Fallen or Fallbass. If they try to Kirin, you can fuse away the Kirin and you can make Rindbrum. Like with the Fallen of Albas, like if they have like for example like the Flamberge Dragon IP setup, like this is also really strong because this forces your opponent to like not play into it. So overall, I think the branded engine is just very very strong. So if we talk about Shadows, mainly this goes back to like Soul Release and the explanation behind that. Like Soul Release is very strong because it's a card that can just banish multiple cards from the graveyard. So having an engine that can just dump an Al Shadow Aerial, what plus netting you like other Shadow monsters that just like pretty much push you through your opponent's board. Like just applies a lot of pressure into the board in general. Like it's just extra pressure that you're applying, as well as like massive graveyard like clearing with Aerial's effect. Um, so yeah, like uh, I think if you are playing this format, uh, playing Apkalon like it would be ideal, just playing two shadow monsters. Or if you're playing a deck like for example Voiceless Voice, you can just play Construct. And Shadow Fusion is actually extra strong in your strategy because you can send light monsters that just have graveyard effects, like for example Low and Saphira. So in conclusion, we're pretty much in a very graveyard heavy format. I think if you are playing this format, you should really like look into these strategies. You should really just prepare for them, and just knowing is half the battle to how you're going to do well this format. The Snake Eye Fire King deck is way too strong, is way too oppressive, but the deck does have Silver Bullets cards, and it does have choke points where you can just interact with it with your strategy. So as long as you know what you're doing and you like cater your strategy to just do well into like this deck and other decks in the format, you should be doing very well, at least to some degree. Uh, but that's it from me. I hope you found this video informative and interesting and to your liking and understanding. More Phantom Nightmare content from me coming soon. Keep practicing and keep dueling.